Another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. Feels like we're back in the studio every day at the minute, Ben. We are getting some amazing, unbelievable guests on a regular basis now, and we are front loading. So a lot of the ones that we're recording at the minute will be going out well in advance, or well into the distance. But we are so excited for our guest tonight. Somebody that we've been working with, and somebody that attended our was nominated, was shortlisted, and was highly commended for her work, and hopefully enjoyed the uprising and the
Definitely.
behaviour. But yeah, Ben, how are you? Jill, how are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you.
I realised what I did then. I asked you both, and you're like, "Who's going to go first?" What I'll do is I'll do it in an appropriate, managed way, like I should do on a podcast. Ben, everything okay?
I'm very well, thank you, my friend.
Good. And Jill, do you want to do a bit of an intro for those people that don't know you, and how are you doing?
I'm really good, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to come on this today. I know we spoke at the Uprising, and we've spoke since, and it was a genuine pleasure to be there. I suppose when I come onto my story in a bit and we chat about the fact that I'm currently serving military, so an educational specialist within the military, I don't very often, in fact, I never get to go to events that I would class as a little bit rebellious. And a little bit fun, and actually it was genuinely really refreshing. So it was really lovely to have that experience, and it definitely set the fire of innovation and that inner rebel. I think I put in my email afterwards, it's definitely set my inner educational rebel alive again. So thank you for everything you did at that event. It was brilliant.
Thank you. I think that is one of the greatest compliments you can get. It's ignited the inner rebel. That's exactly what it's all about. We want to just push against some stuff, right? But we also, in the same way, and I know that you acknowledge this as well, is celebrate those that are really doing amazing things in this space, and not say we're rebelling against and we're saying everybody's doing it wrong. That's not what we're saying. We want to rebel against the system, and we're all in that same space, whilst we celebrate the people that are doing great things. So, yeah, thank you for the kind words. It means a lot when somebody who is doing the kind of work you're doing and who has been recognised the way that you have been, to be able to, for somebody like you to not acknowledge it and see it is lovely.
Thank you very much. So yeah, a little bit about me. So I think while I was thinking about this podcast, I think rebel probably, there's definitely an undertone of rebel in everything that I've done so far. So I'm probably what you would class as an accidental educationist. And I think that is probably sounds a little bit strange when I say, well, I went to uni at 18 to train to be a teacher. But actually, I never actually intended to be a teacher. The Air Force came to visit. I was really lucky, actually. So I went to school in Northern Ireland. I went through the 11 plus system in Northern Ireland. I know for some that's traumatic and it doesn't work out for them, but actually for me, it worked out really well. I went to a really good aspirational school in Belfast. And it was a school that most people were destined for Oxbridge. So I had a look at the back of my yearbook, and I think 20% of my year went to red brick schools. I didn't. I went to University of Bedfordshire. That's a different story. We'll talk about that in a minute, to train to be a PE teacher. All good people start life as a PE teacher, let's be honest. But the Air Force came to visit me at 15. They came to visit the school. That was it. I decided that's what I wanted to do. But one of the things, the qualifications you needed to be a physical education officer was to train to be a PE teacher. So I went to uni at 18 to train to be a PE teacher with never any intention of actually teaching. It was a means to an end. It was a means to do it. And even when I left uni, my intention was go straight to the Air Force. That was it. My mum managed to convince me to do my NQT year. She was like, actually, you know what, Jill, just get it sealed. You've only got 5 years to do it. Go and do it. And I think that's probably in my first year of teaching where I then actually fell in love with teaching. And the school that I taught in it was a hard school. It was a school that had a lot of poverty in it, and there was a school that had a lot of challenges in it. But actually, it taught me to love the culture of education and that culture and that supportive culture. And I know that's one of your themes that's come out in this year's trends, is that culture over strategy any day, and it had it. And then I joined the Air Force, and the Air Force at that point, going through basic training, basic initial officer training, didn't have that culture of supportive education at all, and I really struggled with it. And I think that's what then has lit my passion to create innovative training programs, to create programs that inspire other people, not just people that are truly, really highly academic, and to support the underdog, I think, more than anything, especially in that vocational educational space.
Both of us struggling to find the button. Steve still can't find it. We used to do technology training, you know. In fact, Steve still works for a tech company.
Maybe it's time for a refresher.
Riverside. 5 times I had to click on mic when it's unmuted. 5 times. I'm going to create a video that shows this so people believe me. I had to click on it 5 times, and I don't know what's going on. I don't know why it keeps doing this. And that's absolutely fine. That's why I'm going to do the video. To make it believable. But fascinating, and I think, and ultimately is so. Obviously, going to school in Belfast, was that because there's history and family history in terms of the armed forces?
No, so that's where my family are from. That's where they're still from. I have a lot of family that were in the police during the Troubles. My dad was in the TA, but I suppose I had that strand of service, I suppose I would call it. But I think ultimately I wanted to join because at 15, my head teacher said, the school I went to was called Strathern, and he said Strathern girls don't join the armed forces. So my response was, watch me. And that was it. That was that inner rebel at that point. I thought, no, right, I am. That is what I want to go and do. I'm going to go and do it, and I'm going to go and prove you wrong. And I think I'm genuinely really grateful for that experience. And actually, it was only when I got into teaching, into my first year of university, when I experienced teaching practice in school that wasn't like mine, for kids that weren't necessarily as lucky to have the solid upbringing that I had. But I remember ringing my mum and saying, I am genuinely so grateful for the education system that I had and for the experiences that I had, because I now realise that everybody doesn't get that. And it was, at 18, 19, that was a massive wake-up call for me, and really privileged for the fact that I got to that point without having to have that wake-up call through school. But it's something that I always keep in the back of my mind, and that's so important with the work that I'm doing at the minute. That I didn't mention, I'm currently working with the Air Cadets at the moment, is that it's champion that underdog, and it's champion those people that think differently, and those people who don't necessarily have the resources, as many resources as other people.
And you know what I love listening to that story is that somebody who had a good upbringing, had a really good education system, went to university, has seen that it's not about devaluing that and saying that it's just about it's only one or the other. So that's the reason why we do what we do with the Uprising, is that we celebrate those from the independent sector, and we celebrate those in the state sector. We acknowledge that it's not about, we fight against the independent, we fight against all that kind of stuff, or we want to do is just have this leafy experience for all, and it's all about grammar schools. It's about wherever people are, creating an inclusive environment that supports everybody, and helps people, whatever stage or age they're at, or whatever needs they have, to thrive. Right? Steve regularly quotes a guest we've had on the podcast, a good friend of the podcast, Valerie Hannon, who talks about, she wrote a book called Thrive. The point of education is making sure everybody thrives, right? And that's exactly what I'm seeing, hearing.
Very, very much so. And I think that was one of the things. So I was really lucky that, PE teaching 20 out of the 25 hours were practical. That real kinesthetic learning, and that's the way that I learn best. Really inclusive, really good fun, had an absolute scream, made friends for life. It taught me a lot about the mechanics of education, not necessarily, I don't think, until you get into the classroom without someone in the back of you that you really understand the challenges of controlling a class. But I then, when I joined the Air Force, so I joined the Air Force as an educational specialist. And my first experience with the Air Force was Phase 1 training. So, initial officer training, 26 weeks or 30 weeks as it was then, where I was dropped into a completely different environment. So I was dropped into one that wasn't necessarily kinesthetic, one that I had to learn facts by rote. I had to learn, what type of aircraft we've got, what weaponry they've got on it. And I didn't respond well to that at all. And that was my first time where I probably realised, and I had a real reflection on it, of the fact that and actually there is a line in my final report, which is in the front of my my doctoral thesis, which says Black, which was my maiden name, is non-academic. She must have struggled as a teacher, and she will struggle as a junior officer. And that was my wake-up call to realise, and that's why I went on and researched, because I was like, why did this education system, why did this military system not fit how I learned? Because I've never had an issue before. And then I had a reflection on the fact that never ask a woman her age, but I was born in 1985, and that was right at the start of what you would class as millennials. So that independent thinking, that ability to think yourself, that ability to go away and research, and all of that was taken away from me, and I had to teach, and I had to learn in a particular way that I didn't necessarily cope with as well as I could do. So at that point, I vowed that I would never create a training program or I would never be part of a system that treated people in that way and didn't have that psychological safety element to it. And it's definitely improved a lot now. And I was part of the system of redesigning that course. But it really made me reflect on what I value in terms of education, and was lucky enough to research that. And I've taken that forward into every element of education that I've designed since with the military.
It's an interesting one. I think there's work being done, but I think military is like ed tech, and technology is a male dominated space. So to step into that, to go through the journey that you've been through, have those challenges and that feedback, and then say, you know what, I think I'm going to be successful, in despite of what everybody else thinks, rather than using it as a reason why you can't succeed, I think is a testament to you really, and the work that you're doing. But how did you then go from university to then physical education and the PT kind of work in the military to the stuff that you've done now? Is that, I'm guessing it's not a linear line. I'm guessing it's not a straightforward, like any innovation in any role or anything else. What did that look like, and how has that progressed over a period of time? Because I know you've gone back into different. Were you at a multi academy trust at one point as well, in terms of your experience?
Yeah, so what happened was, by the time I joined the Air Force, the physical education officers had merged with what was called the training officers, which was actually even better because that's a professional education branch for me, and that allowed me to apply then sort of my teaching background to it. And education officers, or what's now called people ops officers within the Air Force, is a brilliant opportunity for those people that have got a passion about education to work alongside the military specialists to be able to design training programs for the military. So I came straight out of training and went straight into RAF Lynham with a Hercules aircraft, where I would sit beside the pilots and the crewmen that were flying the aircraft, and I would sit beside them and I would help them design their training programs to help them to fly. So they would sit beside me and they would talk through step by step how they do something. And I would sit down and I would say, right, how do we create lesson plans for that? How do we assess that? How do we bring that to life? And that was an absolutely amazing experience to fly an aircraft, to get to be part of that world. So I went from that to intelligence. So working with human intelligence, or how we use people to collect information. And that was a real eye-opener because that was an opportunity for me to look at the courses that I was looking at were very army-based. And the army had then an approach of everything is PowerPoint. So how do we then make that more practical? How do we do map reading more practical? How do we do all sorts of elements of the intelligence more practical? And how do we build those courses? And some of those courses were over a year long. So how do we build them and how do we design them? And that was an amazing experience to be sat beside real specialists in intelligence or real specialists in aircraft and work hand by hand as professionals to say, right, you know how to fly it, but you don't necessarily know how to break it down like a sports person. Just because you're the best trampolinist or the best rugby player doesn't mean you can teach or coach by any stretch of the imagination. So how can you break that skill down step by step in a logical order? Because not all specialists can do that. How can you do that? And then how can you build that to make sure that everybody can learn in different ways, but come to the same conclusion safely? And it's really important in our world that it's done safely and within regulations. So I've done that. I've worked on Puma aircraft, Chinook aircraft, designed phase one training. So the training that I talked about that I felt like I didn't fit in and doing as well as, I got the opportunity to go back and redesign that, which was absolutely amazing. That was closing the door on that one. And then after I'd finished my research for my doctorate, the Air Force weren't quite sure what they were going to do with me. So they weren't quite sure how I could put my research into anger. So I stepped out and got an amazing opportunity to go and work for the Shaw Trust, which is a not-for-profit training, big training organisation that specialises in social mobility. So I worked for their Director of Training and Learning for 7 months, and then got the opportunity to step back into the Air Force again. So I've had this amazing opportunity to work with a specialist, to work on military elements, to go back and look at apprenticeships and that vocational area, and then bring that into the Air Cadets where I am now.
This sounds like a fascinating, like you said, it's not a linear, like Steve said, it's not a linear progression. It's a squiggly line, which we
Very
know
much so.
a lot of our young people going forward now, and Steve, I'll get the numbers wrong, 17 million careers, 5 side hustles, however many other things it is. Like the young people that we're working with now are not going to have a straightforward line. So to have examples of people that are thriving in life who have gone through that squiggly career, which I have, Steve has, you have, lots of other our guests have been the same. Interesting. Okay, so you have done a doctorate, and that's when you told us what your research proposal was, or your thesis was around about developing a 21st century learning environment. That sounds like a little bit of Edufuturists, right? A little bit like something that we are keen to dive into, because that idea of you've gone from your experience of education, your rejection by being told that you weren't going to be this, that, and the other, your technical training, vocational training, apprenticeship, and then in the role that you're in. What does that look like? Maybe tell us a little bit of the story around the thesis, and then what you've seen.
Yeah, definitely. So once I got that report and it said I was non-academic, I was like, screw you, gents, I'm going to show you. So I went and did my master's, and my master's focused on, I thought at the time that the instructors didn't get the right level of training to be able to understand, because at that point, military instructors only got a week's worth of training. And I was like, I've done 4 years, and even 4 years to come into a classroom is intimidating, and never mind just be given a couple of weeks worth of training. So I looked at that, and out of that, I thought my thesis question was going to be beliefs, perceptions, and intentions to use online learning. When I got into within a military setting, so then in 2018, I was posted into RAF Cromwell, and I was looking at redesigning the initial officer training. And my first role, so that was 2018 into 2019, and it feels really weird saying it now, my first job was to install Wi-Fi. So I was given the project of installing the Wi-Fi and to bring laptops into the college. And what I very quickly realised was that when we talk about culture and culture reach strategy, in your trends, I remember standing up in front of about 200 people, 200 staff, and saying, right, okay, this is the process. We're going to install this commercial grade secure Wi-Fi, and then all the cadets are going to get laptops. And I remember just this air sucking in the room. And there was people's hands got put up, and they said, you mean you're going to give the cadets laptops? Yeah, of course I am. Well, how are they ever going to listen in my lesson? How are we ever going to get them to concentrate? How are we going to expect them to go into weapons training and they're going to have a laptop beside them and they're going to be on YouTube? I'm like, no, stop. There's a time and a place for a laptop. There's a time and a place for them to do that independent learning. And very quickly, I realised that beliefs, perceptions, and intentions to use online learning wasn't right, because the culture wasn't right. So it meant that there was no way we were going to bring it in if I didn't look at the culture. So what I looked at was how to develop a 21st century learning environment, of which that learning environment, tech would be part of it, but it's not all of it. So my idea was, how do you blend that tech and ed tech? But first of all, how do we get that culture right? So what I did was, my first step was to go into the cadets. And my first hypothesis question was, is there an adult learning environment? And what I did was, I thought, again, the rebel in me, I thought, I'm not going to get this walking in as a more senior rank and just asking them questions. So I gave them a pack up with a piece of paper and colour and pencils. And I got them to draw their learning experience as it currently is. And I knew I had them at that point when I was chatting to them. And I was really open and honest. They all went away with a pack with some lollipops and some sweets in it and their colour and pencils. And overnight, they had to draw their learning environment. And some of the lads were arguing over who got what colour of pink colour and pencil. And I was like, right, brilliant. I know you're in the right mind space, because you're out of that military mindset, because it's really difficult, especially in that hierarchical environment. And the drawings that I got back were absolutely incredible. And it drew a depiction of what probably I felt 10 years before. And I could then identify that at that point then, the learning culture wasn't quite at the point. You were very much in that pedagogy rather than andragogy or pedagogy. You were very much in that chalk and talk environment. And then once I'd got that and I'd done the work with them, I then went and I looked at the instructors, and I looked at their beliefs of what they thought their role of an instructor was. And I used a small cohort of instructors that were going through. And part of that research, I asked them again what they thought their role as an instructor was. And they all talked to me about being a role model. So in their case, it was having their shirts ironed, having their uniform right, having their shoes polished. And not one of them, of the batch that I had, mentioned creating teaching resources, creating an environment, making them feel safe. So it was really interesting to see that that culture just didn't feature, that the cadets were there, they were there to learn, they were there to do it in the way that they were told to do, but the instructors didn't feel like they had any ownership of creating that culture. And in the end, what the cadets drew for me, which I thought was really interesting, was they drew a wall, and they drew them on one side and they drew the instructors on the other. And that wall was an issue of how they would get through learning. And they said they felt there was a wall between us and them. And actually what they said, which was absolutely spot on when you look at technology, is, okay, we've all got laptops and you've given us laptops. So actually 90% of the knowledge they can learn off the laptop. If we're looking at Afghanistan, if we're looking at what type of aircraft we've got, we can Google that. But what we can't Google is the instructor's experience. What does it feel like to be on the front line? What does it feel like to fly an aircraft? How did you get to where you are in your career, and how did you get back there, and how have you succeeded? And that's what they wanted. They wanted that human connection. They wanted that ability to chat, that ability to get their knowledge and to be able to learn from their peers. And that psychological safety, I find, wasn't there. And that was how you created that 21st century learning environment. The technology was an enabler. A bit what they said was the material wasn't right. how they were being taught wasn't right, but more importantly, their relationship with the instructors wasn't right. And if the relationship with the instructors wasn't right, how they would be taught would never be right. And given that at that point, at least 50% of all of the cadets going through had a degree, and at least 20 of those 50% had masters. So they learned independently. So they were in a similar position to me. They learned independently, and then they'd had that stripped away from them. So how do we recreate that culture, of which technology is very much a part, but actually psychological safety, that environment of independent learning and pushing adults to be able to learn independently with that support is really key in that culture piece.
I'm listening, and I was like, this is not just the story that you've just told. Might have different. It might have the term instructor, might have the word cadet. But if we were to do this exercise and apply it to education as a whole,
Yep.
and you'll get some good examples. Of course, you will. I'm sure if you do any research, there's some good examples of instructors.
Very much so.
Of course, but you're taking as a whole in terms of an average and a whole demographic in terms of the data set. If we were to do it across the whole of England, I'd be interested to see how different that would be. And I would hazard a guess that it wouldn't be that much different. That ultimately, through our teacher training and through our support, have we really demonstrated and have we really created a culture for teachers to know what the culture is to set?
Yep.
And for them to set to their learners or their young people.
Very much so.
It's
And
an interesting.
It was really interesting. It's that looking glass theory, and that sort of that theory of the fact that you do thousands of hours as a student in a classroom, and therefore that's really your only frame of reference, and then you replicate that. Well, actually, by the time our instructors had got there, they'd maybe done 15, 20 years in the military. So they were basing their role model of someone who's an instructor as the role models that they had 15, 20 years ago. Well, actually, technology's moved on, culture's moved on. So actually, how do we work out what the cadets want and how they want to learn, albeit within a military boundary, because we are a hierarchical organisation, but learning doesn't necessarily have to be hierarchical by any stretch of the imagination. And actually, I was in a room with 17, 18-year-old cadets this week on Monday, and we were doing some research, and the feedback that the 17, 18-year-olds gave us was better standard than the majority of most of our senior officers could give them. So it's actually, how do you give people credit? And the average age of the people that I did research with in my doctorate was 26 plus. So we're not talking about 17, 18-year-olds, we're talking about adults, some of which had had careers beforehand, that can learn independently in other ways. It was, how do we develop and foster that culture where respect is kept, but the military needs creative, innovative thinkers. It needs problem solvers. We don't know where the next war is going to be. We don't know what the next challenge is going to be. And actually, we take these really bright, vibrant people and we almost make them grey. We take that rebellious nature out of them. We take that problem solving and thinking out of them, when actually we need to get that sparkle and we need to keep it.
Now, I love hearing comments like this from an organisation that will absolutely need to have that balance. I'm presuming, I'm saying absolutely, I'm just making a presumption, that real balance between when we need to follow rules and be compliant and when we need to be innovative. And we've talked about this quite a few times recently on the podcast, that it's not throwing out all rules. We don't need any compliance. We don't need any boundaries. We don't need any parameters for the sake of what's the new thing down the line. And it's also not the other end of the dichotomy, which is that it has to be rules. And then if I won't mention the guy, I think somebody else mentioned him on the podcast actually, who says that it's about making sure that we ban the booths and we've got to get all these people walking in straight lines and this and that.
Yep.
How in the military, where absolutely compliance and following orders is important, how does that balance thing happen with that innovation, this sparkle, this rebel thing that you're talking about? How can you make that happen?
Especially in initial training, you go through what's called the militarization phase, and that's a phase whereby you do comply. Everybody wears the same uniform. Everybody, you turn up at the same time. You have to do the same exercises. You learn to brief in a very particular way, and that's great because that allows you to. That's your introduction to the culture. Learn how to salute, learn what to wear when you're in uniform. But after that, as long as you can comply with what is the basics of applying within that culture, I think then it's allowing people the freedom to think outside the box. So it's allowing people to look at a problem and to see it and come up with those creative solutions. And it's creating that culture of psychological safety whereby people can come forward with those ideas, and they can come forward and they can articulate them in a safe way that they're not being shut down. Because it's at that point where they're not being shut down, people will just do the same thing over and over again, and they won't necessarily achieve what they could have achieved. So it's allowing that black box thinking, that out of the box thinking, that sort of Ken Robinson creative thinking, but within the boundaries that we've got. And we need to accept the fact that while I'm serving, I'm not going to be able to dye my hair purple, or those little bits and pieces that are part of our rules and regulations. But actually, it's creating people, and they talk about it as being respectful challenge. So actually, how do we have a culture of respectful challenge whereby you respect the next rank up or the 2 ranks up, but you can be able to put it across in an atmosphere that you're not going to feel like you're going to get shut down. And that's
sense.
representative of school.
Yeah.
That's exactly the same as school. And we talk about kids. I'm really conscious of that. I've got a little boy who's 6, and he's inherited, I would say, the fun bits of both of us. So my husband and I are quite loud. We're both a little bit rebellious. We both and Alfie's exactly the same. And he asks me questions continuously. And sometimes when you're absolutely exhausted and you think, I don't want to answer this, and then you're like, no, actually, he's asking me a question for a reason. And I want you to be like that as an adult. Therefore, I'm going to keep encouraging you to ask them and to go down those rabbit holes.
And that's important, that inquisitive, curious nature within parameters, and understanding that it's that foundational stuff. A lot of people talk about it from a constructivist perspective, and like it's not about like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We've got to acknowledge there are some places where we've got that, but not at the sake of innovation and the sake of knocking out that spark. I think I've told this story a million times. I feel like I have anyway, about my eldest daughter who's fallen out of love with high school. And the reason why she's fallen out of love with high school is because she says it just seems like there's just another rule about something else and another rule about something else. They haven't spoken to her about the fact that 8 times a week she goes swimming, and she has to get up at 4:30 in the morning, and she has to show real discipline and perseverance. And nobody said to her about, what is it you want to go and do? My daughter, I sat with her yesterday evening, and she said to me, Dad, I think I'm going to become a doctor. I was like, what? Like, she says, yeah, I do love science. I'm quite good at it, and I care about people, and I think I want to go down that route. And obviously, she's a swimmer as well, as we've talked about before. So she's maybe thinking about if she can go down a military route into swimming. And I don't. It's like, and she said to me, she went, I know I haven't talked to you about that before. Now, I'll tell you, if they haven't talked to me about it, school have not even got an idea. But she's inquisitive. So, okay, I said to her, well, what do we need to do now then? Do you want to go and have a look at some universities now? Do you want to go and have a look at some courses? Do you want me to speak to some of my ex-students who have gone on to do medicine and open? And she looks at me, she's like, I can't believe you've got these doors that can open. And this is the bit, right? If we can drag that creativity and that curiosity out of young people, inquisitiveness, and not dampen that fire but stoke it, what could happen? That's the exciting bit, isn't it?
Oh, hugely. And so creativity, innovation and creative thinking is one thing that I'm massively passionate about. And I do a lot of work with the Creative Revolution with Sir Ken Robinson, with his daughter and son-in-law, that are looking at creative thinking and how do you develop that and how do you bring that back into education and you get that spark. And that, for me, from a military perspective, is really interesting, because for me, and it drives me absolutely barking mad, so we go through our careers and we go up the ranks and we have to go on different courses. Well, why do we hold back information dependent on ranks? So actually, why do we not, if you've got the most junior rank and they want to learn about air power, they want to learn about leadership, fill your boots, make it available for everybody, contextualize it at different ranks. But you know what? Fill your boots. If you want to learn about the different types of leadership and you've just joined the organization, for me, that's amazing. But don't just go, well, actually, no, you're only a corporal, or no, you're only a squadron leader. No, let people have it. Let people have fun with it and give them someone to ask the questions about. And don't just stovepipe those little bits of information, because let's face it, it's on the internet. And that's one of the things that we're doing in the Air Cadets at the minute, is looking at how we create those pathways into airspace and cyber, how we give them the connections to ask those questions, and how do we expose them to the world of work and the different options that they have, to look at that leveling up principles and to look at what opportunities they might have out there.
I think it's fast. I think it's why do we do that? Why do we?
I don't know.
Why do we tell people that of a certain age you only get to learn a certain thing.
Surely, Steve, that has got to be about like that en masse that we
Yeah,
create
it's that
timetables.
factory setting. Yeah,
Factory setting. It's the only way to do it.
Yep.
Or no, that's not a lie. The people have felt the only way to do it en masse, surely, is that factory setting.
yeah.
I don't know.
And often, I think it's
I was
absolutely
just going to
barking.
say. Sorry, Jill, go on.
No, it is. It's absolutely barking. You know, if you have a 12-year-old that's absolutely passionate about space, let them learn about space. If you have a 15-year-old that's absolutely mad for leadership, let them do it. Why are we saying just because you were born that September, you can only have that piece of information? You give the next grain of nugget the following year is absolutely mental. We don't do it necessarily in sport. We don't do it in the world of work. We don't say, actually, no, you're going to sit here for a year and then the next year you can go for the next job and the next year you can go for the next job. So why are we doing it with school? It's absolutely nuts.
Just 3 times. Just 3 times this time for the mic. But yeah, I just don't. I'm not sure. But but I do. Why do we do it? It's because we've always done it that way, and the culture is that's. It's very difficult to break down. And I was working with an organisation. Won't say where. Won't say what type of organisation. But their school day finished at 3:10. Okay, and I was like, okay. Sometimes they finish at 3:30. Sometimes they finish at 3:00. 3:10. Okay, sounds like a good time. And I said, why do you finish at 3:10? And they all looked at each other and went, don't know. Don't know why we finish at 3:10. And I said, okay, all right, that's an interesting one. And then one of the senior members of staff said, I do know, but it's going to be a little bit embarrassing. And I said, okay, please share if that's okay, and you're okay to do so. It's and everything else. So she said, the bus that used to take the majority of students home, and it was a public bus, used to come outside of the school gates or near the school at something like 3:15 or 18 minutes past 3. The reason they finished their school day at 3:10 is it gave them time to finish and allow those students not enough time to loiter outside of the school building, but to get out and make sure they could catch that bus. And I said, okay, so is it a recent change that you... No, that had existed since the 90s. That bus timetable probably doesn't exist. And for the last 34 years, everybody's been looking at each other going, why do we do it in that way? Because the number whatever bus used to run past, and I was like, that's just an example of doing the same thing over and over again for just no other reason rather than just blindness in terms of that, just that inability to just think differently and review because it's always been done that way. And that's a real challenge. And I can imagine that's a massive ship to turn around across a whole system in terms of the military or education. I get it, but we can take those small steps to at least have annual or reviews of everything, surely.
Yeah, hugely. And it's setting the culture for it, and it's reviewing the culture, and it's asking the right questions. And for a lot of people, especially if they've been in the military for a long period of time, they're institutionalized. It's always been done that way. So I went to an event last week, and just a really simple example of the fact that the dress code for males was suit or black tie, and for females, shoulders had to be covered. You had to have closed toes, and there's no plunging necklines. Well, I wet myself laughing. I was like, why are my toes too sexy for this event? Can anybody tell me? Why do my shoes have to be closed toes? But that's putting people off because people are going, well, why do I want to join? Because I don't want to dress like that. So actually, the organisation has to move with the times and it has to move with the culture. We've seen it with hair. We don't have to wear hair and buns, which sounds absolutely ridiculous saying it out loud. Tattoos, those sorts of things. But we have to move as a culture. But with that, we need to look at the education system and moving the education system with it at the same time. And just having those people that are willing to ask the right questions and that constructive questioning is really, really important. And I think we don't do that enough in education.
My favourite thing that has just been said on a podcast, it may well be the title, why are my toes too sexy for this event? But it is, it's like there'll be a rule. I spoke on a podcast recently. I told Steve, I've already explained that I cheated on him by going and speaking on another podcast recently. And I was on that podcast, I was talking about that. Do you know that analogy that everybody seems to talk about, or that little idiom where a woman is cooking a joint of meat and she cuts the end off it, and her daughter says to her, why have you cut the end off that piece of meat, Mum? And her mum says, well, I don't know, my mum used to do it. So
Yeah.
she went, I'll go and ask my mum. And mum says, well, I've always done it. I don't know why I did it. My mum did it. So we go and ask Grandma, and they ask Grandma, and
Yep.
they say, well, I cut the end off that piece of meat because we never had a pan big enough to put it in. It's that whole, like, the bus timetable, the cutting off the piece of meat. We do it, the closed toes, because that's what it's been. And if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. And but actually, even that as a statement is not true anymore, because in a world that is moving at the pace that it's doing, we aren't going to see tomorrow exactly the same as what we did today. And we're going to miss a generation or multiple generations if we don't do something super different than what we've seen. And interestingly, like, that idea about building a culture that allows for that and then go into strategy next, I think is powerful. You are passionate in that space around how working with young people as a complement. So obviously you're in a youth organisation that isn't necessarily it's not education in a traditional sense in terms of a schooling, but you know that it complements alongside that traditional education pathway. How are you seeing those, like, links between what you do and then into that traditional education pathway, and what could we do more to strengthen those kind of things?
Yeah, definitely. So just for background, so I'm currently borrowed by the Main Air Force at the minute to work with the Royal Air Force Air Cadets. So they are our uniformed youth organisation. So we have 50,000 kids across the UK, and we have just over 1,000 points of presence. We've got 12,000 volunteers, so it's an organisation of 60,000 plus, which is absolutely amazing in terms of size and context. There are a number of uniformed youth organisations. You've got the Army, you've got the Navy, you've got the Marine Cadets, you've got police cadets. Our unique selling point is the fact that we are linked, our sister service is the Royal Air Force. Therefore, our focus is airspace and cyber. And therefore, we have this unique opportunity to give the cadets that are in our care an exposure to the aerospace industry, to military flying, but also space and cyber, which are two sectors that are moving incredibly quickly. And what we find is there's been a number of reports that have been published over the last couple of years. So Northampton University did a study. In fact, they're doing a longitudinal study. So they've published the first two reports. And they did a study into the impact of uniformed youth services on kids, so school-age children. And there's some incredible statistics in there on, for example, self-efficacy. One of the things that we as a youth organisation have the opportunity to do is kids are maybe with us twice a week, and then sometimes at the weekend, summer camps, etc. We have time to work on what are known as what people know as soft skills, but really they're hard skills now because we need them more and more often. And we have this incredible opportunity to put the cadets into experiences that they wouldn't get a chance to do in school. So right from the very beginning, we get them to lead their peers. We get them to run activities. We get them to go on to camps and to interact with the military or interact with the industry. We give them the opportunity to go and fly, whether it's in a glider or in a powered flight, to go on the back of a Chinook. We give them the opportunity to do all of these really incredible experiences that really adds to their social and cultural capital. And that social and cultural capital is absolutely amazing. And especially for those kids that don't have a family life where parents can afford to take them on holiday. It's an absolutely amazing way of them being able to travel, and to being able to see the UK, to be able to see certain elements of the world, and to mix with other people. And one of the statistics that I find is mind-blowing is when we looked at it, kids are less likely to end up in prison. The attendance in school tends to be better because in our combined cadet forces, there are multiple incidences of kids turning up for combined cadet force, but not turning up for school, because actually they love that camaraderie, they love that structure, they love being part of something that's bigger than them, they love wearing the uniform, they take so much pride in it. But one of the big statistics is the level of self-efficacy. And what they find was that if you are a cadet and you are on free school meals, your self-efficacy statistically should be below those kids that they find, those people that are not on free school meals. But actually what the report found was that it's equal or if not higher. So actually it's giving them the opportunity to complete qualifications, to interact with peers, to do activities like leadership that they don't have the opportunity to do in school, and get qualifications that lead to opportunities to open doors to world of work or further and higher education. So it's a real levelling up, a real leveller, and an opportunity. We put a number of different funding strands in place with our Air Cadet charity for those people that their families can't afford for them to do activities, go away on weekly camps, so things like that, to allow them to be able to access it.
Beautiful. It's a powerful combination. Steve's going to say I pressed it 10 times, but it's a powerful combination, right? And they're working with the education, because they might love coming to cadets, but if we know that it's not just cadets or just school, you bring them together, combination, and you work together. That's powerful, and it kind of, we don't want to undermine either one of those options, right?
No.
We want to support both of them and see that holistic young person thrive. I keep saying thrive, and we obviously talked about holistic education in that trend as well. That yes, like you said, if they want to do leadership, if they want to do space, they want to do cyber, they want to do whatever, great. But we've got to make sure that we thrive in every area, not just the cool stuff, right?
Very much so. And it's also making sure that what they're doing with us complements school, but also that it is accessible. It's one of the things that I've done since I've come in, is to make sure that the training is accessible. So it's not just for those kids that are really bright, that are going to get the straight A's of GCSE anyway, because actually that's just adding to their portfolio, and we want that, because that's great. That might get them to Oxford or Cambridge, that might get them into a flying scholarship, absolutely outstanding. But actually what I really care about is, for example, those kids that have got dyslexia that are with us, our way of doing BTEC before was multi-choice testing online. And we know that can be problematic. We know that that's just learn and dump. So actually I've shifted the BTECs away, and the BTECs are now going to be elements of coursework, so that it allows them to apply their knowledge. It allows them to access accessibility tools. And it gives them that reflection time as well. And what I really want is for when they complete qualifications with us, that they can pitch up at a job interview or pitch up at a university interview, and they can talk about those qualifications, what value that had to them, and they can apply it.
Yeah, and I think it was this week where there's been a pause and review, haven't there, on level 3 and vocational education.
Just
which
today,
I think
today, yeah.
Yep.
Was it today? Yeah, so I saw that, and it was announced by Bridget in the House of Commons, to say, look, we're going to pause it because ultimately the decisions that were already put in place before we came would have we feel a detrimental effect. Not to that bit, but I think behind the scenes, the development of Skills England, in terms of the levy and apprenticeships and all of the different stuff that potentially will come out of the new government and the changes, which is great. We're fans of the new government. Let's say that as the least. But ultimately, what our opinion is, whatever party you believe in, or whatever your political persuasion is, that ultimately, I don't think it should be the responsibility of any one party. I think education as a whole, to transform it, should be a cross-party discussion. It should be something that's focused around what the vision is and what education should be, rather than a political beast that people win votes over. If we get it right, then ultimately it should be completely just removed from the conversation, like many. And I think, but I think this is a step in the right direction. I think for many people, those people who are successful, that get celebrated in August on those 2 dates where GCSEs and A levels, brilliant. But look at all of the population in terms of their learning, and where they've come from, and look at all of the people who can't, because they're not even in school. Look at the million children that are not in formal education or on any one basis. I don't know what their current stat is, but last time I looked, it was around 1 million children that don't ever sit a GCSE because they, for whatever reason, don't sit into it. The cadets and those qualifications are absolutely key to support them to continue to have their passion for learning, not just, well, we don't believe in it and it's a devalued qualification.
Yep.
What is a valued qualification then? What do you mean by that? What do we understand it to be? And it's a celebration of their progress, not passing.
Very much so. And being military, we can't comment on politics, but what we can say is that for us, those qualifications, in whatever certificate it is that they walk away from us, it's really important that helps them to lead them onto the next stage of their life. And what we need to make sure is that those qualifications that we give them are relevant, and that we are not a recruitment organisation for the military. We can aspire to attract, so we can let people see what the military may look like if they chose to go there, but we definitely can't do active recruitment into it for them. But what we can do is we can look at where the pathways out that cadets can go to. So we can look at UK PLC and the aerospace industry. So, for example, we've just released, and we released it at RIAT last week, the UK's first level 2 qualification in space. And I was really careful when we designed that qualification that the first module is to do with the solar system. And we can't, because it's not always taught in the national curriculum. We couldn't assume that the solar system was taught in schools. So they'll have a revision of the solar system. The second module goes into looking at how space travel has affected our life on Earth. So things like tempura mattresses, things like hand tools that are battery powered, all came from International Space Station and research. They can relate what happens when you research in space affects life. And our third module in that BTEC is how they can go and work and research in space. So it ties it all together and it gives them that hook where they can say, well, I could go to uni, I could go and work with one of our industrial partners. And we've got a big event called the National Air and Space Camp in August. And what we're doing for the first time ever, it's a big careers fair and it lets them see where they could potentially go in the future. We have companies like Google come in now to brief us on apprenticeships. We have companies like Serco Space come in to brief us on their apprenticeship routes. So they can see if you do this qualification, we can point you in the directions of school, university, or UK PLC or the military. But what we can also do is here is what's open to you, because those companies really value what we as cadets, what the cadets come out like, because they come out with that self-efficacy. They come out arriving on time. They come out with uniform that's clean and they can present themselves. So it's a really good way of tying up a vocational qualification with a real life link.
Yeah, and I think everybody knows this. And if you don't, it clearly doesn't matter. But I didn't do A-levels. I did a BTEC, level 3, extended diploma. It might not even be called an extended diploma back in the day, but I can't remember what it was. And I think it was sports science and applied science.
I think it were all levels, weren't it?
I did them before I did the BTEC. But I remember primary school, and I've told this recently on the podcast, did really, really well. Not because of probably results, because of my sporting background.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't really in primary school. And the school that I went to was just a state primary, but it was really celebrated in terms of their sporting achievements and what we did. Went to secondary school. Oh, man. I did not get on and do well. I managed to somehow come out with 11 GCSEs at C, which I needed 5. But I remember the teachers going, "Are you sure you've not picked up the wrong certificates?" Jokingly going, "Been told I would never succeed, told I would never get anything." And there's one of the teachers going, "Well, you're celebrating, but you're a bit average, aren't you?" And I was like, "Absolutely brilliant." And I said, "Fuck you as well." So apologies, we're going to have to put an E on it. But I remember that, and I was thinking, well, they can't put me in detention now. And then I went and then I was like, what do I want to do? I have a real passion for sport. My mum was a drama teacher and an English teacher. I thought that. I loved what my mum did. She was overworked and burned out even back in the day, but she loved it. She had a real passion for it. So I followed that, went into vocational education. The reason why I say this is I'm passionate about vocational education because I now do a role that really probably that's set up for, because I was constantly wanting to learn and everything else. But my question is, and I had this, so you're doing the irony, you're doing a space qualification, a level 2 BTEC qualification. They're never going to be an astronaut or go into space, so are they, with a level 2 BTEC? Talk to me about that.
So the UK space industry is one of the fastest growing industries at the moment. So there are over 50,000 jobs that are dedicated to the space industry in the UK, and they are really struggling to fill those jobs because people don't necessarily have the context of space, they don't understand it, or they don't know that the jobs are there. And that is everything from, so the Air Force have now got space lawyers, for example. Because the law of space now is really specific. You have the engineers that are working on satellites, which we're now going to launch from the UK, communication specialists to be able to launch those. So it's not just about astronauts. And for me, actually, one of the biggest industries within space within the UK is sci-fi and art. So actually, if you give someone the inspiration of space and you teach them about the solar system, you teach them about space research, and they go and design a t-shirt or a hoodie, or they go and they write a sci-fi book, absolutely incredible. Because just because we're doing some of the theory element off, it doesn't mean they can't take it in a creative way. So that's why we're doing it. Space is going to get ever more important. It's going to get ever more important in terms of space travel, in terms of military, and in terms of civilian world as well. So if it can light that fire, if it can get them to think, and it's not necessarily all about them going and being an astrophysicist, it's about that context of space, the language of the beginning element of it, and lighting that creative fire underneath them. They may be the next military space operator, they may be the next astronaut, who knows? But it's not our job as teachers to tell kids what they can achieve. It's to point them in the direction of that and then let them go.
Yeah, let them go.
I'm just gonna have that recording just if anybody ever asks me that, and just say, and I'll probably caveat that with a bit of a swear word and everything else. But I suppose that shows a culture of society as well, the understanding, that devaluing of what a vocational qualification is and why you should do it. And also, what it shows is, thanks intelligent person, as you deem intelligent, but clearly don't know anything about space and actually what the industry is, because you're making an assumption that everybody that does a space qualification becomes an astronaut.
Yep.
How many astronauts from the UK have we actually sent ever? And ultimately, nobody would ever achieve. And if you have a PhD and all this and a doctorate, that's not the way it works. I love that answer. So Ben, come with it.
Do you know what also is really interesting? One of our guests recently, Kern Kelly, talked about how he had a passion for astronomy, and when he was a young boy, he had a passion for astronomy. And when he went to high school, he asked his teacher about. You should listen to this story in the podcast. Everybody else should listen to it on this podcast if you haven't done already. It's brilliant. And he talked about how he went to speak to his teacher, his science teacher, when he went to high school, and said, "When are we doing astronomy?" And he said, "Oh, we don't do astronomy until X." And he was disheartened because he loved astronomy, and he felt like. So he went home and told his mum, and he said he was quite open. He says, "My mum was a hairdresser. She wasn't an academic. She wasn't, but she found a way, because somebody who used to go into her salon worked at the university in the astronomy, and then he, as a 11, 12-year-old boy, she managed to get him into some lectures to find out about astronomy, and she found a way for that to happen, and that she found the fire and went, do you know what? Run with it. And let's find a way to do it." And just imagine what would happen if we built an education system, like not just one-offs, not just those people who have got good parents at home or that have got strong academic values or skills or whatever else that looks like. But every young person got an opportunity to say, what is it that's in you? What spark in you that we could just throw some fuel on and go for your life and make a difference? If that's space, if it's woodwork, if it's technology, well, good.
It's that Ken Robinson finding your element, isn't it? It's working out what drives you. It's working out what's really passionate about you. And I know, when I say I was an accidental educator, it's that I know that I love to watch people progress, and I love when you see that light come on in someone's face, and you're like, oh right, okay, I get that. And I know that's my element now. But there's a lot of people that take a while to get there, and that's great. That's what portfolio careers are for. But our job in the cadets is we're rewriting an aerospace qualification at the minute. So we've got an aviation, but I always joke and say the world doesn't need any more pilots. But what we need is aerospace specialists. So we're going to do that. So it's going to give the cadets a language of what does it mean to work in the aerospace industry. So whether that is them working in operations, so doing air traffic control, whether that is them flying the aircraft, whether that is sustainability and the language of sustainability, and what does that mean, because we're going to have to create green fuels. So we can give them an introduction and a language to what the aerospace industry looks like. So again, if they want to go down one of that rabbit holes, do it. Absolutely brilliant. But they can understand what the theory is, and then get pointed to the jobs and the companies that they could potentially go and work in or go and research in, which again, if you don't have someone who's in the military or someone that has that aerospace background, we did some work with a bunch of primary school kids, and it made me giggle. I was in a room of a bunch of CEOs, and I could see it coming a million miles off. Primary school kids had to come in and pitch. We had to pitch to them ideas of how to get them into the aerospace industry. And I sat there and I said to them, most of these kids won't have been on holiday. They won't have been to an airport. They don't understand what it is. And funny old thing, when they came in, virtually none of them had been on holiday. So how do you give that child the opportunity to explore someone who's fascinated by flying if they've never had the opportunity to do it?
Yeah. There's so much work going on behind the scenes that we can dig into. But this season, we've been finishing the podcast, and we're constantly changing it, because we know that some people that are coming on the podcast actually listen. It surprises me and Ben. That's absolutely fine. It's not just
keeps you on your
our
toes.
families. So we've mixed it up, and we're shuffling it. But we're going to go into 3 quick-fire questions.
Go on then.
So I'm going to start, then Ben, and then I'll finish. But the first one is, if you could change one thing about education overnight, what would it be?
For the industry to be more open-minded and creative.
Love it. What's the most exciting educational trend that you see emerging?
The most exciting trend, I think it's that lifelong learning approach. I think it's people realizing that they don't need school to learn. And actually, school's great in that formal setting, but actually, if you put your mind to it, you can learn pretty much anything. So actually, that self-autonomy and that lifelong learning, I think, is really exciting.
Who is your biggest inspiration in education?
I've mentioned him a couple of times. I think it's got to be Sir Ken Robinson. I think David Price and Sir Ken Robinson are both definitely up there for me. I think both of their ideas about creativity, about looking at education different, and about valuing the arts as part of that. That's something that I haven't necessarily mentioned, but that element of the arts, especially that STEAM into STEM. And actually, there is no science without creative thinking. And how do you develop that creative thinking? So I think both of those, that approach to open learning and that approach to creativity, for me, I often go back to both of their books.
Yeah, me too. And they are powerful forces that have that probably weren't recognised anywhere near enough as what they needed to be in their own time. So
educational prophets, I think they see the future before everybody else did.
Yeah, the absolute epitome of Edufuturists, as in the term Edufuturists. You know what I mean? That's where it sits. So yeah, it's been what a conversation this has been. Like we finished a triple header of 3 incredible guests. And Jill, thank you so much for the work you're doing. Thank you for your kindness about what we're doing as well, and for sending us up on the uprising. But these thought processes about igniting that inner rebel, that idea about focusing on creativity and pushing the envelope. It's good that we've got people in leadership responsibilities with young people that think like that. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for joining us on the Edufuturist podcast tonight.
My pleasure, and thank you for everything that you're doing to push the needle and to change it.
Thank you.